As the system notified Junseo that the vampire elder, Elizabeth Bathory, upon her imprisonment contract will be created, a massive beam of golden light erupted from her. Blocking the intense light from his eyes with his hand, Junseo curiously stared ahead. And just like that, the contract was complete. Again, the system stated that Elizabeth has been registered as the familiar of the player, Shin Junseo. Junseo flinched, clearly shocked upon seeing Elizabeth's current form. He commented, "It's not that I didn't expect you to be in a different form, but this is a bit unexpected." Meanwhile, when Elizabeth saw her new form, she flipped out, screaming like she is having a mental breakdown. Junseo continued without a reply, saying that to think Elizabeth's a cat and not a bat is truly surprising, and her necklace even changed to fit her. Ignoring Junseo's words, Elizabeth was visibly shaken as she touched her cheek with her paw. Reverting back to her human figure, she cursed loudly, telling Junseo to wipe that amused smile off his face. "A familiar? Don't make me laugh. How dare you use me as a familiar, rather than face this humiliation? But her words were cut off as she transformed back to a cat. Junseo replied her, saying that even if maintaining a human form is too much, as unfortunate as it may be, it seems right now she doesn't have the right to refuse this humiliation. Just then, another notification popped up, indicating that if corrupted mana or mana is supplied, the lock on the familiar's abilities can be temporarily disabled. Junseo condescendingly said that Elizabeth is a familiar that can't even do a simple transformation properly at will, then he doesn't even know what is the use of her as a familiar. Lifting her up, he continued that he is in her hands for now, antagonizing her even further. Elizabeth then drew her kitty claws and said to Junseo to let her go. Brushing off her feeble tantrum, Junseo nonchalantly said, "Oh, so it seems you can still communicate in this form. This is unrelated to what we were talking about. But were you really betrayed by those people?" At this point, Elizabeth was done with the little patience she had as she replied, saying, "What kind of bullshit are you talking about? I told you everything." He placed her down and said, "You don't need to say it again. I heard it well. It's just that while listening something wasn't adding up." Turning his head to look at their lying corpse, he continued, "You said they stole your power for their own survival, right? But is living like that even meaningful? I don't know exactly what happened, but your family doesn't look that exquisite. I'm not even sure if they even have a legitimate nationality or ego. Rather than a living creature, they're closer to dolls that move with a preset program." Angrily gritting her teeth, Elizabeth replied that there's nothing weird about that. The mentality of humans is meant to change to fit their physical body. They ended up in that state because they forcibly used corrupted mana. Of course, their ego and rationality would atrophy. Do you expect me to feel sympathy for those idiots? Junseo casually shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, not exactly. I'm just saying, if it was me or most humans, we wouldn't choose to continue a life in that manner." He then walked up to the male doll, thinking that if the male doll moved bodies, then he should definitely have that object, right? His eyes lit up as he found what he was searching for. Elizabeth watched Junseo from behind and thought, what is with him? If it was him, he wouldn't have chosen to continue a life like that? What's the point of saying something like that now anyway? Satisfied with what he found, Junseo was giving off mana as he held a corrupted mana crystal ball in one hand and stretched his other at Elizabeth, commanding her to come here. And just like that, Elizabeth's kitty body suddenly moved to Junseo, hovering in the air. She silently thought that to think even a simple order like this has this level of compulsion on her. Still hovering in the air, Junseo said, "I don't know if you're aware, but this is an item called an essential crystal. It is usually used for black magic affiliated class spells and saves a part of your own mana and soul into it. They must have taken and stuffed this into the doll, bringing their souls into them. They might not have had enough power, but clearly they were quite skilled technically." Hearing this, Elizabeth asked Junseo what he was getting at. Suddenly, she was transported into the memories kept in the essential crystal. She was momentarily horrified hearing her deceased family's voice. She turned around to see them discussing something with a gloomy expression. "Is there really no other method?" He asked her wife, to which she replied, saying, "I've seen several thousand different visions since a few days ago, but the results are always the same. The collision that's been happening between two different worlds in the last few years, that frequency will continue to increase uncontrollably. Even if we postpone it as much as we can, In 5 years, it's too late to prepare for it. Confused, Elizabeth approached them thinking that this isn't the present reality she is witnessing at the moment. It must be a vision based on memories. Are these Dad's memories? Desperately, the man asked again, then what about that method? The different dimension hypothesis you were researching. If it's that, at least our family will be able to survive. Again, she replied him, explaining that even if we receive Beth's help, we'll be able to at least separate the land surrounding this estate. But the problem comes after. If our world collapses, this estate will forever be adrift in the space between two dimensions until someone from another world discovers us. Several hundreds or even thousands of years, it might take even longer than that. Placing his hand on one of his eyes, he cursed, "Damn it, we'll just be waiting for a slow death." Just then, their son spoke up, but not Beth. His mother asked, "What do you mean?" But the little guy explained, continuing that as she said, they can only live a few more years. But Beth Noonan is different from us. Can't we at least save her? The reason our family is alive is all thanks to Beth's actions on that day. If this is a fate we can't avoid, I think that at least one member of our family should survive. But there's no way Beth will cooperate. Our only choice is to make her. And just like that, we see Beth tied up by mana threads. She was stupefied, asking her family why? Just why? I trusted you all. Her family stared at her, silently apologizing. "We're sorry. We're truly sorry. But this is the only way to protect you." Each holding mana crystal ball in their hands, they contemplated that even after they transfer themselves into a doll's body, will their consciousness remain? For a while, a few dozen or even 100 years, they'll be able to maintain their human consciousness. But after that, they'll slowly be worn away. After 200 years, we probably won't even remember who we are. But we'll still be dolls. We have to. Even if our dimension is isolated, we don't know what kind of variables and dangers might befall us. This time, we shall protect Beth from those dangers. I don't know how long it'll take, but we'll do it until someone from another world takes Beth from here and saves her. Now, another notification appeared, drawing Jusio's attention. It states that 50 corrupted mana has been consumed by the familiar Elizabeth Bathory, and with that her abilities are temporarily freed. Meanwhile, finally knowing the truth behind her family's actions, Elizabeth was in tears. In her human form, she collapses on the ground, still crying uncontrollably, asking why her family never told her. If they had told me, then maybe. But Junseo cut her off, saying that it was obvious that you would have all just met your end together. It was a ruin that couldn't be avoided, and you would have chosen death alongside them. Junseo patience was wearing thin as Elizabeth's time was running out. He told her to not just sit there, but get up. She doesn't have much time. A confused Elizabeth turns to Junseo, wondering what he meant. On the system notification, it shows that Elizabeth's abilities have less than 3 minutes before they're sealed. Staring at it, Junseo calmly said out loud, "It's not even a complete recovery. But to think 50 corrupted mana only gives 3 minutes. I didn't pay such an expensive price for you to keep crying like that. I think it's your role to conclude things at the very least. They're the ones who have stayed as dolls for all this time for you, all to protect you. To conclude everything, you should help them rest yourself." This shocked her greatly. With tears still streaming down her cheeks, she told Junseo that she can't do something like that. How could she? Just then, Junseo roared, saying that she doesn't have to be so pathetic. Even if their destruction and deaths were confirmed, they could have just organized everything and choose to live their last moments in happiness. But they chose not to do that. They trapped and sealed themselves into a life imprisonment without an end just for her future, which they couldn't even be sure would be certain. This isn't for her or for himself, but for them. That's the least she could do for their devotion. Her final obligation for her family, the bare minimum she needs to do, is to put them properly to rest. And with those hashed truth, Elizabeth felt resolved about her conundrum. She sluggishly got up, and with teary eyes, stared at her deceased family. She then remembered all the happy moments they shared together. She gritted her teeth with determination, and with a loud bang, immense amount of mana erupted from her family's corpse, destroying their doll form. Elizabeth stared at their burning form, silently saying her goodbyes to her family. The system finally notified that the additional goal, which was Elizabeth finding out about the truth, is achieved, and the reward was a mischievous treasure chest. And just like that, the story dungeon was 100% completely rated. The additional rewards were also given. A while later, at the entrance of the gate, we see the medics team from the association helping the hunters out. A medical staff and Taehyun shoulder the Vice Guild Master Myung-gun and Sung Jae around respectively, while Kim Yi-hyuk was also being shouldered around by 2 medics. Junseo walked out of the gate with Elizabeth in her kitty form. He casually said to himself, "I feel like I was in there for longer than expected." Turning towards Elizabeth, he noticed that he can't say that in front of her, given the amount of time she spent trapped there. He then asked her, saying, "So, what do you think? In comparison to your world?" Elizabeth replied that there's no comparison. Even the mana she can feel is so weak. Still, she doesn't have the right to choose. As they walk through the busy medical station set up, Elizabeth continued that regardless of what kind of place this is, she'll do her best here and live on. After all, that is her obligation to her family. The scene shifts to a nice-looking apartment in a dimly lit night under the full moon. Inside, we see Kang Yorin with her arms crossed as she sighs, reaffirming her decision on not giving up on drinking. With that thought, she walks towards her kitchen counter lamenting on how infuriating her day has been. Her eyes nonchalantly shot up, staring at a shadowy figure in her kitchen area. Knowing who it was, she asked why the shadowy figure, who she refers to as a rat, is doing here. "Are you here to ruin things till the end?" The lights turned on, illuminating the room. Under the bright light, this shadowy figure turns out to be a guy, who replied her that being called a rat is a bit harsh. Anyway, he continued that waiting for a colleague with a glass of an exquisite wine from an exhausting day is considered caring. On the other hand, Kang Yorin was not having it. She outstretched her hand outflowing with mana and asked what the guy was really doing here, commenting that his life won't even be enough to pay for the bottle of wine he opened. Looking unconcerned with Kang Yorin's threat, he asked about what went down in the unconfirmed dungeon, stating that as both of them are aware, a certain someone is very interested in the unconfirmed dungeon. Although to him, he is only interested in one person. After a while, he learned that Kang Yorin blacked out at the most crucial part of the raid. Crouching on the kitchen island, he teases her of being the self-proclaimed queen, blacking out pathetically during a raid. Kang Yorin loudly protests, claiming the situation got twisted, and even if she was unconscious, she confirmed the results with her eyes properly. Yoon Taehyun finished the boss with only 2 swings of the sword the supporter gave him. Even considering a berserker's explosive state, it was an unprecedented amount of power. Clenching his fist, he whispers that it's gotten interesting. Then his smile turned sinister. He stated with a cruel and vindictive laugh, excited that S ranks are different from the usual, making Taehyun worth hunting. Turns out the guy is the hunter-killer prior from the dungeons earlier. But Kang Yorin, ever vigilant, said that although Taehyun is definitely memorable, they should rather focus on the supporter. This surprised the guy greatly. She continued that being a D rank, she thought Junseo was a small fry, capable of making measly weapons. But witnessing a weapon capable of enduring Taehyun's full power is not something they can overlook. Brushing off what she said, he commented that being able to know and make sturdy sword is pretty useful, and it's kind of also useful to have one take around during a raid, but a tool in the end will always be just a tool and nothing more. If there's nobody to grab the hilt and use it, it's useless on its own. Walking past her, he continued that the ability of those on both ends of the sword and the purity of the fight is what's important. Other than that, everything else is simply impure and unimportant. Kang Yorin replied that if he hunts Yoon Taehyun, there is a high probability that Junseo might be the main cause of his demise. A D-ranked supporter that has got the queen obsessing over. Although it's not to the extent of Yoon Taehyun, now, I'm curious and might kill them both. And with that, he left her house. The scene shifts again, and a few days have passed since the dungeon raid. Lying on his bed, Junseo looked completely exhausted even after resting through the last couple of days. He thought his recovery condition would be better after some rest, but found out that he still felt drained. You see, the reason behind this was not the demonic weapon production as he thought it was, but rather Elizabeth's absorption skill. The rate at which he was being drained was unexpected, so he decided to ask her if there was a way to rid himself of this side effect. Turns out that Elizabeth wasn't there but outside, which he can understand. Being a familiar, Junseo can forcefully summon her, but it's understandable to be curious about this world. This was perfectly fine as long as she wasn't doing anything strange, Junseo thought. Next, Junseo decided to check out his reward, the mischievous treasure chest. Junseo stared at the chest in disbelief that he is seeing a mischievous treasure chest in real life. It was a random reward that is frequently brought up by a player, and although what comes out from the box is randomized, it's not 100% random. The object that the mischievous treasure chest bestows is limited to something the owner of the chest needs, though the problem is that the function has a screw missing like a sharp and firm sword that can only be used to attack and not block, again, like a shield that can take any impact without recoil. But that would also randomly reflect that impact onto someone else regardless of its extreme weakness. What makes it wicked is that it's not an unusable item. There are a lot of cases where people try to use the equipment while matching the conditions somehow and still end up seeing blood. If there's an item that I need right now, it's just one thing. Something with the ability to recover mana or increase the total amount. What type of item will come out is basically confirmed. Anyway, what's important is what type of weakness the item will have. And with those thoughts, Junseo opened the mischievous treasure chest. A massive mana aura burst out from the chest, illuminating the entire room, radiating a blue aura even from outside his apartment complex. The system window popped up, notifying Junseo of what his random selected item was going to be. A few moments later, in Junseo's hand, was the item trader's gluttony, in the form of a ring. This allows the wearer to use the skill, Mana Drain. The function of Mana Drain is proportionate to the amount of favorability the target has to the person wearing it. Seeing this, Junseo was shocked with the item he got. In a fit of anger, he threw the ring against his wall, bouncing off each of the surfaces it hits. Just then, Elizabeth came in, puzzled about what's got Junseo all shades of red. Junseo, holding his forehead in his hand, thought that Mana Drain per se isn't a bad ability. If anything, it's kind of an OP skill, but the condition of favorability is ominous. Licking her paw, she calmly told Junseo that she doesn't know nor care about why he was angry, but an idiot from before is here for a visit. Curious, Junseo got to his balcony wondering who this idiot might be. As expected, the idiot turns out to be Kim Yi-hyuk, who got out of his car, checked his surroundings, and true to his nature, immediately started questioning why Taehyun would let his supporter, Junseo, live in a shitty neighborhood. Then he started insulting Taehyun, insinuating as to why he pretends to be so generous when in actuality he is a freaking bastard who doesn't give a shit about his employees. Staring from above, Junseo nonchalantly agreed, saying Kim Yi-hyuk is really an idiot without question. Looking at the apartment complex from below, Kim Yi-hyuk silently thought that although it looks a bit bad for him to scout a supporter by himself, Junseo is valuable enough for him to do that. Even if it wasn't for Yurin's report, I could definitely feel the final situation myself. At that time, Shin Junseo made something for Yoon Taehyun, and the energy that came from him was enough to break through the barrier and reach me for a moment. I don't know why he's at D rank, but he definitely has the potential of at least A rank if not higher, which means that Yoon Taehyun didn't hire him for nothing. If he isn't completely Yoon Taehyun's guy, I wouldn't have done this. No. Actually, even if he was his guy, I still would scout him. Just then, Junseo came out of his building complex fully aware that Kim Yi-hyuk obtained his address illegally. As arrogant as always, Kim Yi-hyuk responded that it's unimportant how he got his address, but normally, in cases like this, most people would be very impressed. To think that the best guild wants them so badly that they would resort to such strategy. And from the looks of it, Junseo must have been quite impressed to come out to meet him personally like that. However, Junseo casually walked past him, claiming he didn't come out to meet him. Rather, today was the renewal date of the helper concurrent job certificate, and that's where he is heading. Triple. Regardless of what that bastard Taehyun promised to give you, I'll give you triple that. And I know that what happened in the dungeon must have made me look like a bitch in your eyes, but to those who have ability, I treat them properly. I'll give you the best treatment that you can't compare with anywhere else you go. Turning around, Junseo commented that he is even surprised that Kim Yi-hyuk is self-aware to that extent, but regardless of what he can offer, it wouldn't change his response. He'll give him the same response he gave to Taehyun: there is nothing you guys can give me. Violently gritting his teeth, Kim Yi-hyuk was pissed that he got rejected by Kang Yorin, and now this prick, Junseo. He vowed that he would make both of them beg to work for him. Walking on the streets, Junseo wondered why he hasn't noticed before, but the means of arriving at the Hunter Association through public transportation was trash. However, it makes sense since most hunters use their own vehicles. While walking, he bumped shoulders with someone in a hoodie. He turns and apologized, to which the guy didn't respond. A minute later, while in thoughts, he noticed that the guy seems familiar. His eyes lit up, noticing who he thought it was. He then turned back and ran, trying to find the guy. He thought out loud how he could still be alive. Across the streets from him was the guy in the hoodie, watching. The scene shifts to a good-looking building in a brightly lit day under the sun. On the streets was a gate being guarded by two security guys. A yellowed-haired guy with a hammer loudly tells his team to prepare to enter the gate. Murmurs about the dungeon's safety rippled through the group, from C-rank gates and onwards. Even high-ranked hunters can get hurt or die from a moment of mistake. You're probably all aware, but when it comes to matters of safety in a dungeon, nothing is too much. A golden-eyed woman with glasses nervously told Junseo that this was her first time in a C-ranked gate, or a higher gate for the matter. Is that so? Well, our leader is a veteran, so if we follow his lead, there won't be any much trouble. Although, that's not something I can assure you, Junseo replied her as they approached the entrance of the gate. A guy behind them seems to be observing them intensely, and with a creepy expression, he gives a brief monologue about Junseo. Recalling how Junseo was a D-rank support with a maker aptitude with over 2 years of being active as a hunter and a year of practical experience. During that year, the beginning of that year to be exact, was the Dawn Guild, and at the helm of the guild was his brother, Dojin Hyung. Now, the Dawn Guild is nothing worth remembering at present, as the guild members were completely wiped out with the exception of their D-ranked support, Shin Junseo. We then get a flashback on when the two were discussing about the dungeon that led to Dojin Hyung demise. A D-ranked gate? Why are you bidding for a mere D-ranked gate? With the standard of you and your guild, shouldn't you aim for C or even higher? It may be D-rank, but the scale is quite big and it has a lot of resources. In dungeons like this, the profits are enormous compared to the manpower invested, so large-scale guilds usually take them. How cheap of them, when they already rake in all the riches. D-rank dungeons are probably nothing but pocket money for a large guild. Yeah, but that's not the case for new guilds like us. There's a lot we can do even if we only get half of what was expected. I can reinforce the equipment of my hard-working guild members and can train them in exclusive facilities instead of with other guilds. There's really not much left, brother. Not necessarily. Just you wait. Soon the whole world will know the name of our Dawn Guild. Unfortunately, that dream never got to fruition, and what Yoon Moon Dojin received was a call from the association about his brother's death. At the association, Yoon Moon Dojin argued about how the whole accident didn't make any sense. My brother is a B rank and a recognized veteran at that. There's no way he'd be killed in a dungeon like that. The officer replied that it wasn't just any dungeon, but an unconfirmed dungeon. The post-investigation results showed that it was a place with a very high degree of danger. An unconfirmed dungeon? Back then, Yoon Moon Dojin felt that Hyung's death wasn't a simple accident. His brother said that he had bid for that gate through an official auction. He didn't know about the people who auctioned it, but his brother wasn't someone who would lie to him. Why? Just who could have manipulated this gate's bidding? Something's off. Something that goes beyond plain common sense, Yoon Moon Dojin thought. Then, the officer asked Yoon Moon Dojin that perhaps his brother told him something beforehand. No, he didn't. Well, your brother's corpse will be placed in your custody in 2 days, after all investigations are complete. I feel a bit hesitant to say this, but it was fortunate we could find his remains because there was a survivor. It's because of him that we were able to easily collect the corpses. Hearing this, Yoon Moon Dojin was dumbfounded. A survivor? Yes. I don't know the specific circumstances, but it seems he was lucky. And with that, we're back to the present. With a bright smile, the yellowed hair guy commented if they're lucky and cautious, they'll be able to finish the dungeon raid without any severe injuries. And with that, they entered. Yoon Moon Dojin was in thoughts, wondering how a team of veterans died in a D-rank dungeon, leaving only a survivor, who was just happened to be lucky and is just a D-ranked supporter. He vowed to find the truth of what really went down in that dungeon, and if Junseo is involved in his brother's death. A while later, at the entrance of the dungeon, the hunter-killer approached the security men, claiming to be part of the party that entered the dungeon they're guarding. But due to wrong timing, he was left behind. After checking his documents, he was granted entry. He arrogantly smirks, saying that it is a relief he is granted entry. Hearing this, the confused security guy asked what he meant by that, but the guy brushed it off with a joke, claiming he would have died if he wasn't granted access. He entered the dungeon, Murmuring, Moondojin, let's see the abilities of this hero candidate. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, which seems to have a couple of centuries castles layout, the party has defeated a somewhat night monster of a Duke Danger level, which was a rank B. Looking completely exhausted, their leader, the yellowed hair guy, was in disbelief that they actually defeated a monster of that level. On the other hand, Moondojin did not share the same sentiment, but noticed that something was wrong. He thought there's no way a monster of just a C-rank dungeon could be that strong. Even if he has to underscore the assessment of the monster, it was at least B-ranked, and if he had hidden his abilities in the fight, it would have ended badly. At the same time, placing his hammer on his shoulder, their leader thanked Moondojin for his effort, saying he was talented and he was glad to have him on his team. Moondojin replied that he only deserved half the praise while the rest of the team deserved the rest. Looking at his pair of daggers, he recalls how during the battle, when they seemed to be losing the fight, Junseo approached him with a deal using his skill, rental pay. Junseo's deal was if he makes a new pair of daggers for him, he'll forget about his abilities and involvement afterwards. Again, as he continued to stare at the daggers, he wondered how the strength and cutting power as well as the weight of the daggers were all of best high-grade weapons, and how a D-ranked support can make such a weapon. He calls out Junseo's name as he approached him, asking who he really was. Confused, Junseo replied that he should be asking him that question since he neither told him his name nor have they introduced themselves to each other earlier. Moondojin answered him that it's true they never met each other, so he will then change his question. Do you know the name Moondoyun? Pulling his mask off his face, he continued that Moondoyun was his older brother, the guild master of Dawn Guild that you were part of just a year ago. Honestly, I don't care about your identity. I just want you to tell me everything about what happened to my brother and how you're related to it. Junseo's eyes widened in shock, and just when he was about to reply, multiple whirlwind sword auras were aimed towards them. Moondojin was momentarily pushed back as he blocked the attack with his sword. Gritting his teeth, he wondered if there was monsters still left alive. Apart from Junseo and Moondojin, the rest of the party weren't so lucky, and they died instantly after being hit. The guy walks in with his sword resting on his shoulder. He was impressed that his target, who was going to be a rising star in the future, not only deflected his attack, but someone also did the same. Just then, Junseo lets down his shield with a cold expression on his face. Moondojin continued to grit his teeth as he stared at the guy, thinking he doesn't know where he came from. He looks very strong and is definitely a few steps ahead of him. With a mockery expression, the hunter-killer commented that there was no need to be scared, but stopped mid-sentence as he spots Junseo. Smirking, he said to Junseo that he heard that a D-rank support was in this party, but he had no idea it was Junseo. Confused, Junseo asked what he meant by that. The guy continued that it was a shame since he needed Junseo to make the fight against Taehyun a bit more interesting. Regardless, he can't let Junseo leave here alive after this situation. Moondojin was puzzled how the guy knew Junseo. Then the guy raised his sword with a killing intent aura, and while smirking, he aimed his attack towards Moondojin, who crossed his arms and bore the brunt of the attack. The attack sent him retreating backwards, and he silently thought that he can only face such attack head-on at most 2 more times. Another whirlwind sword aura was directed at him. Moondojin swiftly dodged and launched towards the hunter-killer. And in an overwhelming slash, Moondojin was trashed back across the room. The hunter-killer commented, saying, "Well shit. Looks like this bastard is useless like the others." Staring in Junseo's direction, he continued that this assault can't even be considered as a 2 versus 1 fight. Junseo replied that he wasn't wrong. Just then, the guy's eyes bulged out as he felt an overwhelming pressure. And just like that, corrupted mana threads wrapped around his entire body and his sword, immobilizing him completely. Then we see Elizabeth at the other side of the room, and with a cruel smirk and an annoyed, pissed-off expression from Elizabeth and Junseo respectively. They both responded that in actuality it's a 3 versus 1 battle.